From the glass-walled penthouse overlooking Manhattan's shimmering skyline, you'd think Thomas Whitmore had it all. Billionaire, real estate mogul, philanthropist, and close confidant to some of the most powerful figures on the planet, Thomas was admired and envied in equal measure. Then came the morning his 19-year-old son, James Whitmore, vanished without a trace. No note, no phone call, no sign of forced entry, just a void where his beloved child used to be. At first, some suspected a classic kidnapping for ransom, but as investigators dug deeper, they unearthed secrets that would spin the Whitmore family's gilded world upside down, leaving everyone speechless. Thomas Whitmore wasn't born into wealth. Raised by a single mother in the Bronx, he spent most of his teen years selling newspapers on street corners, sometimes envying the sleek town cars that whizzed by. Hungry for success, he latched onto every opportunity that came his way. By the time he turned 30, he had flipped his first 10 properties, forging a name for himself in the New York real estate market. Rumor had it that his first big investor was none other than Henry Goldstein. Yes, the same venture capitalist who had also backed some of Bill Gates' philanthropic projects in the early 2000s. By partnering with the best and managing to stay 2 steps ahead of market trends, Thomas amassed the beginnings of a massive fortune. Yet for all his success, there was a darker side to Thomas's ambition. An incessant drive to prove himself meant he often sacrificed relationships, time, and even moral boundaries. He conquered, yes, but each conquest came with a cost. At charity galas, Thomas's name rose in social rank, aligning with the likes of real estate tycoon Stephen Ross, Tesla investor Ron Barron, and even garnering a nod from Warren Buffett at a philanthropic conference. But beneath the glamour lay a foundation built on cunning deals, broken partnerships, and secrets carefully buried. It was on the cusp of this ever-growing empire that James Whitmore was born, an event that Thomas believed would mark the start of a new era for the Whitmore legacy. Growing up in a gilded cage, James was chauffeured to his elite preschool in a black SUV, escorted by private security wherever he went, and introduced to the world's most exclusive circles. By 8, he'd been profiled in high society magazines as the young prince of real estate. At 13, he attended prestigious events and sat next to U.S. senators, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and A-list celebrities at black tie soirees. His mother, Lisa Whitmore, played the part of the doting wife and mother impeccably. A former model who'd once walked the runway for Chanel and Dior, Lisa was every bit the glamorous companion. Thomas wanted graceful, charming, and fiercely protective of their son. Lisa ensured James wasn't entirely swallowed by the family's immense privilege. She introduced him to philanthropic missions, encouraging him to volunteer in soup kitchens and orphanages. Always her voice gently reminded him that with great privilege came greater responsibility. By the time James hit 19 and enrolled at Harvard University, like many children of the ultra-wealthy, he seemed poised to inherit his father's empire. But whispers began suggesting that James wasn't as thrilled about real estate as his father wanted him to be. Some claimed he had other passions, and perhaps a deeper dissatisfaction simmered beneath the surface. It happened on a crisp December morning. The Whitmores had just returned from their private ski resort in Aspen to the family's penthouse in Manhattan. Thomas, as usual, rose early to handle calls with international clients in London. Lisa was busy reviewing holiday charity functions. James had been home on winter break and was supposed to join them for a family breakfast at 8, except he didn't show up. At first, Lisa assumed he'd overslept. She sent staff to check his bedroom, but the room was empty. His bed was untouched. pillows neatly arranged, as though he hadn't slept there at all. Even more unnerving, James's phone lay on the bedside table, fully charged, but he was nowhere to be found. Thomas's security detail swung into action, combing through every inch of the penthouse. Nothing. The surveillance cameras covering the building's front entrance and lobby also revealed no sign of James walking out. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Panicked, Lisa dialed the police, while Thomas contacted his personal head of security, Oliver Green, a former FBI agent who had served on high-profile kidnapping cases in the past. Within hours, the New York media got wind of the disappearance of the billionaire's golden boy. Helicopters buzzed around the building, paparazzi swarmed the lobby, and speculation hit a fever pitch. A kidnapping was the most obvious explanation. After all, who wouldn't want a piece of the Whitmore fortune? But as time passed and no ransom demand appeared, the initial theory began to unravel. If it were a typical kidnapping, surely the culprits would have asked for money by now. And, suspiciously, the building's extensive security systems showed no unauthorized entry. The more the investigators searched for evidence of foul play, the more confounding the case became. Lisa grew distraught. Endless hours at the police station left her feeling helpless as she doggedly pored over security footage alongside detectives. The videos revealed James returning from dinner with a friend the previous night, wearing a black jacket and carrying a worn leather backpack. He entered the elevator to the penthouse, but never emerged on camera anywhere else. Oliver Green meticulously reviewed the digital access logs for the penthouse floors. There, in the early morning hours, he found something peculiar. The system registered James's keycard being used at around 2:14 a.m. on a restricted service elevator, one typically used by housekeeping. This elevator fed directly into the underground parking garage and was off-limits to residents. A quick check with staff revealed no one had authorized him to use it. Suddenly, there was a possibility James had left willingly. But why? Thomas refused to believe his son would slip away without reason. "He has everything he could ever want," Thomas insisted, voice laced with desperation. The security footage from the service elevator's entrance was mysteriously corrupted audio, but no visual. The faint hum of the elevator doors opening and closing gave investigators no clue who might have been with James. Something strange was at play. As the days dragged on, Lisa began to question everything. Was James depressed? Had he dropped hints that he felt suffocated by his father's expectations? Late at night, long after Thomas collapsed into an exhausted slumber, Lisa pored over old text messages, emails, and social media posts. She discovered an email from James to a Harvard roommate named Callum Farnsworth, someone from a well-known British banking family. In the email, James complained about the incessant pressure to be a mini Thomas Whitmore. He wrote words like trapped, lost, and desperate to break free. Lisa's heart sank. There was more to James's disappearance than any of them initially suspected. Maybe he wasn't a victim of a kidnapper at all. Could he have chosen to vanish? If so, where was he now? And did he even want to be found? The NYPD assigned Detective Sarah Hernandez to the case, a renowned investigator who had tackled several high-profile disappearances in the city. Known for her relentless pursuit of the truth, Sarah was rumored to have once solved a missing person case involving the daughter of a European ambassador just 48 hours before she would have been smuggled overseas. Sarah wasted no time. She interviewed everyone in the Whitmore household, from the cleaning staff to the personal chef. She scrutinized building maintenance logs, deliveries, and unusual activity around the clock. She also connected with Interpol, just in case James had fled the country or been taken abroad. One line of inquiry led Detective Hernandez to an obscure piece of surveillance footage from a nearby boutique hotel. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on the morning James vanished, a figure resembling him was spotted walking hurriedly with a man in a hoodie. The second man's face was never revealed, but his clothing bore the insignia of a certain private security firm, Stratford and Sullivan. Detective Hernandez recognized the name. Stratford and Sullivan had been tangled in controversies, occasionally working under the table for powerful individuals who preferred to remain anonymous. Could they have been hired to help James escape, or worse, to escort him somewhere against his will? When confronted with the photograph, the staff at Stratford and Sullivan refused to divulge any client's identity. Citing confidentiality agreements, they told Sarah to get a court order if she wanted details. Another dead end, perhaps. But Sarah had a knack for picking at the smallest thread until a hidden tapestry of truth was revealed. Meanwhile, Thomas Whitmore launched his own parallel investigation, leveraging every connection he had. He reached out to Senator Alan Brock, hoping to use political influence to expedite James's safe return. He called in favors from executives at major telecom companies to track any phone usage that might be linked to James. He even considered enlisting the help of the Pinkerton Agency, a move that made Oliver Green bristle with professional jealousy. Thomas's hunt turned up more questions than answers. Strange rumors started floating around, whispers that James might be hiding from something within the family. Then there were suggestions that an arch-rival of Thomas's, Dmitry Volkov, a Russian oligarch with a vendetta, could have orchestrated a covert operation. Years ago, Thomas had outbid Dmitry on a prime piece of Manhattan real estate, and tensions ran high ever since. Could Dmitry be sending a message by targeting James? Weeks passed with no word from James. Lisa's health deteriorated. She lost weight, stopped sleeping, and became prone to anxiety attacks. The penthouse, once brimming with life, now felt like a mausoleum. Rumors circulated in the press that the Whitmore family was spiraling. Then, a package arrived. In the early morning hours, the doorman brought up a small brown parcel addressed to Thomas Whitmore. Inside lay a single USB flash drive. Fear lodged itself in Thomas's chest as he plugged it into a computer. A video file popped up showing James in what appeared to be a dingy basement, slumped against a concrete wall. His eyes darted nervously off camera. No audio accompanied the video, just James sitting there, clearly agitated. It lasted only 20 seconds before cutting to black. Everyone in the room, Lisa, Thomas, Oliver Green, and Detective Hernandez, watched the clip in stunned silence. James was alive, but the setting and his anxious demeanor suggested captivity. Then Oliver Green noticed a faint detail on the wall behind James, a small, peeling sticker reading J.L. Haulage. A quick online search revealed that J.L. Haulage was a defunct trucking company with storage facilities scattered around the outskirts of New York and New Jersey. The company had been defunct for years, possibly with a few remaining abandoned facilities. Immediately, teams were dispatched to search every location that matched the old business records. Detective Hernandez coordinated with local authorities in both states. Over the next 48 hours, task force units raided 3 long-abandoned warehouses. Each time, they found no trace of James. The only remnants were dust-covered crates, broken wooden pallets, and evidence of squatters. Lisa's hopes soared and then crashed repeatedly. Thomas threw everything he had into the search: private jets, drones equipped with heat sensors, specially trained 9 units. The emotional toll was massive. With every new lead leading nowhere, tensions flared. Thomas snapped at Oliver, accusing him of incompetence. Lisa, meanwhile, retreated into herself, speaking only to Sarah Hernandez, who had become her pillar of strength amid the chaos. In the midst of mounting frustration, Detective Hernandez received an unexpected call from an informant. The voice was carefully modulated, but claimed knowledge of James's location. The informant mentioned seeing him in a place called Riverview Cottage near Montauk. Even more startling, the informant suggested that James wasn't being held against his will, but rather was there voluntarily. The cryptic tip ended with a warning, "Be careful whom you trust." Riverview Cottage belonged to an old friend of Thomas's, a certain Robert Crestfield. Decades ago, Thomas and Robert were business partners before an ugly falling out over a failed real estate venture. The land deal had cost Robert millions, and some said he never forgave Thomas for it. Could it be possible that James had turned to Robert for help or refuge? Detective Hernandez, Oliver Green, and a small team drove straight to Montauk under the cover of night. Thomas insisted on going as well, but Sarah refused, fearing that his presence would compromise the investigation. Lisa, too distraught to travel, agreed to stay put in Manhattan until word came. Riverview Cottage was an idyllic seaside property overlooking the Atlantic. At first glance, the place appeared deserted, no lights, no movement inside. But as Hernandez and her team approached, they spotted footprints in the sand leading around the back. The cottage door was locked, and upon forcing it open, they found themselves in a musty living room littered with empty takeout boxes and half-burnt candles. They swept the cottage, calling James's name in hushed tones, guns drawn, flashlights illuminating dusty corners. One bedroom door was locked from the inside, but when Oliver shouldered it open, the room was vacant. The bed was slightly warm, indicating someone had been there recently. On a bedside table lay a handwritten note in James's unmistakable scrawl. "I'm sorry. I had to do this on my own." A small envelope accompanied the note, containing a photograph of James and Robert Crestfield standing side by side. Neither looked threatened, if anything. They appeared determined, as though hatching a plan. A swirl of conflicting emotions overcame the investigators. Had James orchestrated this entire disappearance to get away from his father's overbearing shadow? And what role did Robert play in all this? Detective Hernandez confronted Thomas with the new evidence. Thomas's face went ashen at the suggestion that James might have willingly sought out Robert Crestfield. After all, Robert had once threatened to ruin Thomas for what he called dirty deals and backhanded tactics. If James was with Robert, was it out of desperation? Or was Robert using James as leverage against his father? A million questions rattled Thomas's mind. Could his own son hate him enough to side with a former enemy? Lisa took the news even harder. She had never liked Robert, recalling times he'd tried to undermine Thomas's business, and once even attempted to spread rumors in the press. Now, she found herself torn between gratitude that James might be safe and fury that he'd shut her out. In an effort to gather more information, Detective Hernandez went to Harvard and spoke with James's friends and professors. That's where she met Callum Farnsworth, the roommate whose emails Lisa had discovered. Callum revealed that James had been planning some big move for over a year, something that involved stepping away from the family empire to chart his own path. He mentioned James's frustration with how his father treated people, especially in business deals that destroyed local communities. Callum also noted an incident where James confronted Thomas about a new redevelopment project in a low-income neighborhood. Instead of addressing his concerns, Thomas had told James, "This is how the world works. You either adapt or get run over." It was then James started confiding more in Robert Crestfield, who was known for supporting grassroots urban renewal projects. Armed with this new perspective, Detective Hernandez arranged a discreet meeting with Robert Crestfield's attorney. If Robert had no malicious intent, maybe he'd be willing to talk. Sure enough, the attorney hinted that Mr. Crestfield is open to dialogue under certain conditions. A week later, an unmarked car pulled up outside a quaint restaurant in Brooklyn after closing hours. Hernandez stepped inside. Seated at a corner table was Robert Crestfield himself, wearing a simple navy sweater and looking nothing like the vengeful magnate the Whitmores had described. His hair, once impeccably styled, now had threads of silver, and his face bore the lines of regret. Over a pot of coffee, Robert revealed the story. James had reached out months prior, desperate for a way to break free from the Whitmore brand. He felt suffocated and morally conflicted by how his father's empire operated. Robert had initially rebuffed him, suspicious that it was some ploy. But James was sincere. He wanted to build a philanthropic venture aimed at helping the communities Thomas had marginalized. Robert agreed to help him disappear temporarily, giving him time to plan without Thomas's interference or the media's constant scrutiny. The plan was never meant to spark a citywide crisis. It was supposed to be a short-term arrangement until James could publicly come forward with his new initiative. But they hadn't counted on the avalanche of chaos his disappearance would trigger. What about the video in that basement? Detective Hernandez pressed. Robert looked genuinely perplexed. Video? Basement? That wasn't part of our plan, he insisted. It began to dawn on them that something else was in play. The video of James in a dank basement, the sabotage of the service elevator footage. Someone was manipulating the narrative. Robert insisted that James had never been in any basement. He'd stayed in safe houses, sure, but all of them were respectable short-term rentals or empty vacation homes, not rat-infested cellars. So, who had sent the USB? Was James truly in danger after all? Or was someone trying to exploit the situation to extort or destroy Thomas Whitmore? Detective Hernandez's mind whirled with fresh possibilities. Perhaps the disappearance had originally been orchestrated by James and Robert, but now an unknown party had seized upon the opportunity to stage a kidnapping or worse. Late that night, Thomas's phone rang from an unlisted number. He picked up to hear a garbled, modulated voice demanding a massive sum of cryptocurrency in exchange for James's safe return. The call lasted less than a minute, just enough to state the demand and threaten that if you keep searching, you'll never see your son again. Panicked, Thomas conferred with Oliver Green. The new demand made little sense. If James had orchestrated the disappearance himself, unless James had been double-crossed. What if someone had discovered James's plan and took advantage by actually abducting him? Detective Hernandez worked with the Cybercrimes Division to trace the call. In parallel, Oliver Green reached out to colleagues in private security who specialized in tracking cryptocurrency transactions. Over the next few days, they managed to piece together a digital trail leading to an abandoned office building in Newark, New Jersey, an old watch repair shop that had gone bankrupt 2 years prior. Something about the building felt right. The location fit the gritty aesthetic of the basement in James's video. With a carefully assembled team of SWAT members, Detective Hernandez prepared for a raid. Robert Crestfield, worried about James's safety, asked to join the operation, but was denied no civilians allowed. Under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, law enforcement converged on the decrepit building. The sense of tension was palpable as they cut through rusted locks and pried open the steel doors. Sweeping in with flashlights and ballistic shields, they navigated dank hallways and musty offices. Then, from behind a reinforced door, they heard muffled yelling. The door burst open under a battering ram, revealing James, bound to a chair, his face bruised and eyes filled with relief at the sight of the police. He was alive, but not unscathed. He'd clearly been roughed up, possibly drugged. Detective Hernandez rushed in, cutting through his bindings and helping him to his feet. Clattering footsteps echoed through the corridors as the captors tried to escape. 2 men were caught near the back exit. One wore a balaclava, the other limped badly. They were swiftly disarmed and apprehended. Amid the frenzy, a third man managed to evade capture, disappearing into the night. When questioned, the two men insisted they were hired muscle, paid handsomely by an unknown intermediary via an offshore account. They claimed ignorance of the bigger picture. However, search teams found documents in a side room that implicated Dmitry Volkov, the Russian oligarch, and Thomas's longtime rival. It appeared Dmitry had learned of James's fake disappearance and capitalized on the scenario to orchestrate a real kidnapping, aiming to extort Thomas and destabilize his empire. James was taken to Mount Sinai Hospital for evaluation. Lisa, on hearing the news, rushed to his side, dissolving into tears. The moment she saw him, Thomas arrived soon after, guilt etched into every line on his face. For the first time in his life, he seemed genuinely humbled. As James came around, he explained how things spiraled out of control. He'd planned to slip away under Robert's protection to work on a philanthropic project. But before he could reach Robert's Montauk cottage that fateful night, he was intercepted by masked men in a black van. They'd evidently gotten wind of his plan, used that knowledge to abduct him, and then staged the entire fiasco to make it look like a ransom kidnapping. Robert Crestfield, upon hearing that James had been rescued, breathed a sigh of relief. He stepped forward to reveal the details of their arrangement, confirming that James had never intended to ask for ransom. Robert also provided evidence that could help convict the men who took James and tie them back to Dmitry Volkov. During the ensuing legal proceedings, Robert and Thomas were forced to revisit old wounds. At one point, they came face to face in a courthouse corridor. To everyone's surprise, they shook hands. It was an uneasy truce, perhaps, but a step toward laying past grudges to rest. News outlets erupted with coverage. The city was riveted by the unfolding drama, the missing billionaire's son who had, in fact, planned to vanish but then got kidnapped for real. Tabloids churned out salacious headlines, while more reputable newspapers ran in-depth analyses of the power struggle between Thomas Whitmore and Dmitry Volkov. Harvard classmates reacted with shock at the revelations. A wave of sympathy poured in for James, who'd simply tried to break free from a life he felt was morally compromising. Meanwhile, the public began to question the ethics behind Thomas's real estate empire, spurring a new wave of protests against gentrification. Although James recovered physically, within a few weeks, the emotional scars ran deeper. One of the first things he did upon release was hold a press conference, with Lisa by his side. For the first time, the public heard his voice crack as he described feeling overwhelmed by the weight of family expectations. He confirmed that he had intended to start a foundation aimed at revitalizing marginalized neighborhoods without displacing their residents. Thomas also spoke at the press conference. Visibly shaken, he expressed remorse for having neglected his son's emotional well-being. In a surprising pivot, he announced a major philanthropic initiative, pledging a substantial portion of the Whitmore fortune to socially responsible housing projects. It was, many speculated, a bid not just to salvage his public image, but also to reconnect with James. Though the father and son had a long road ahead, the near tragedy began forging a new bond between them. Lisa mediated some of their earliest conversations post-kidnapping, ensuring that both men actually listened to each other. James laid down strict conditions. If Thomas wanted him to be involved in the family business, then the business had to change. No more backdoor deals, no more predatory practices. In the weeks that followed, the Whitmore Real Estate Group quietly dropped several controversial development plans. They also partnered with local community leaders for more ethical housing projects. "We can be profitable and conscientious," James stated at a board meeting, looking directly at his father. "We just need to care enough to try." In the aftermath, Dmitry Volkov faced indictment for conspiracy and attempted extortion, though he fled the US to avoid arrest, leaving behind a messy trail of frozen assets and disgraced associates. Robert Crestfield, for his part, finally found a measure of peace. He and Thomas parted ways amicably, each acknowledging their shared responsibility for past conflicts. James, resolute in his mission, continued his studies at Harvard but also became the public face of the new Whitmore Foundation, a philanthropic arm dedicated to ethical urban development. He spent less time in the penthouse and more time visiting community centers, talking directly with the people he aimed to help. Meanwhile, Lisa reclaimed her life, focusing on her own charitable endeavors, championing causes like mental health awareness and family counseling. Though the Whitmore family would never be the same, perhaps that was for the best. They emerged from the nightmare, changed, burdened by the memory of what almost happened, yet liberated by the truth that finally surfaced. And there you have it, the twists, the betrayals, and the startling truths behind the disappearance of James Whitmore. What began as a secret plan to escape a gilded cage morphed into a chilling abduction orchestrated by a vengeful rival. Along the way, hidden motives emerged, old scars were torn open, and a family caught in the blinding spotlight of wealth was forced to confront its darkest corners. Yet, out of the turmoil came a renewed sense of purpose, a father's resolve to change, a son's determination to forge a more ethical path, and a family's decision to heal rather than break apart. If you found yourself captivated by this real-life drama fiction, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this, and share it with friends who love riveting tales of mystery and transformation. Your support keeps these powerful narratives alive. Thank you for watching.